This is the super cool compression technique that I learned that changed, revolutionized my mixing forever. Okay, no, but this video is actually about something. Multipressors and dynamic EQs, and why starting to use them more and understand them more really did change how I approach my mixing, and I think suddenly things were starting to sound a lot better and I was getting much happier with them. Hi guys, it's Summer, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here then welcome to the chaos. I do all things music related on this channel, from audio engineering style-y content to production and songwriting challenges, which I haven't done one of those in ages. I will do one of them again at some point, guys. I've just been struggling to find the time to like film that kind of video and then also edit them because they're a little bit more cumbersome. Anyway, point being, I will do something like that again at some point soon, promise. To just generally talking about music and musician life. Anyway, today's video is another not quite so fun, just audio engineering style, production style content. We're going to talk about some mixing stuff, dynamic EQs and multipressors, not in a like how-to guide of how to use them or anything like that, because as I've said a few times on my channel, I am still very much a baby engineer. I am a work in progress as a mix engineer, as an audio engineer, as all of these things. I'm still very much learning a huge amount, but I just wanted to share some thoughts and some knowledge about dynamic EQs and multipressors, and where I have used them in mixes I've been working on recently that I feel like has really boosted this mix and actually improved it in a way that just reaching for a compressor or an EQ wouldn't have. Because I feel like it's a topic that I really haven't seen a lot of people make content about online as much, but it's something that I've heard pros in the industry talk about a lot more. They are very useful tools, and a lot of the time if you're thinking that you want to reach for a compressor or reach for an EQ but it really isn't solving the problem, maybe it's because you want to consider using either a dynamic EQ or a multipressor instead. I am going to assume in this video that those of you watching know what a compressor does and know what an EQ does. So if you don't already know much about EQs and compressors, this video might be a bit confusing, so you might want to go away and do a little bit of learning about that before you come back. But just for quick comparison purposes, if we have a compressor, we know that this is what a compressor looks like and these are the settings on it. You know, a compressor is generally going to take down the loudest parts in your mix that go over your threshold and bring it down by whatever ratio you set it to, and you got your controls like an attack and a release and all that stuff usually on a lot of them. So if you're putting it on the lead vocal and you're putting a compressor on, it's only going to affect your lead vocal when it goes over the threshold. It's going to affect the entire frequency range of that vocal. It's just concerned with the gain, it's just concerned with the volume, it's not concerned with anything relating to frequency. Whereas an EQ is exclusively concerned with things relating to frequency. It also changes the gain on, you use an EQ to change aspects of the gain, but rather than having a threshold that you set where when something goes over this threshold, yeah, I want you to do this, you're just either boosting the gain or bringing the gain down throughout the entire track. So if I do like a bell curve here and I reduce around the 100 hertz by 4.4 decibels, it's gonna do that for the entire track regardless for how loud this already was. Dynamic EQs and multipressors, however, are like if you combined these two things together. If you combine an EQ and a compressor together. Tokyo Dawn Labs, that's the one I want. This is an EQ that just has a dynamic EQ option in it. It's not like specifically just a dynamic EQ, you can use it as a normal EQ, but if you click on this threshold button, it becomes a dynamic EQ. So that's the main difference here. As you can see, we've got these controls that we didn't have before. We've got the threshold and we've got the ratio, we've got attack, and we've got a release. Same as we have on our compressor. We've essentially combined the two. I'd say a dynamic EQ is the most like combining a regular old EQ with a compressor, because a multipressor is slightly different. This is what Logic's stock multipressor looks like, and I've looked at a couple of other multipressors and they do generally look a lot like this. They do generally have this sort of display at the top where this is your gain, this is your EQ, this is your frequency part, and this is how you set essentially EQ values, but they're not exactly like EQ values in an EQ. Let's just quickly look at the dynamic EQ and then I'll talk about why a multipressor is similar but a little bit different. Dynamic EQ, you set it much like you would a normal EQ. So you set the frequency around which you want it to be affected. So if you're doing a bell like this one, you pick that's around 387 hertz we're affecting here, and you can set your Q value to decide how steep your EQ curve is here. So we can have it really, really steep, so it's only really affecting a few frequencies around this and it's dropping off quite quickly, or we can have it not very steep at all, so it's affecting a lot more frequencies around this main frequency point. Anyway, so you set those two values, and as you can see, if you wanted to set this like a normal EQ, your gain value, you'd set it down or up, depending on whether you wanted to attenuate or boost that signal. If you're using it as a dynamic EQ, then really you want this gain set to 0, because what you're actually looking to do is set your Q value, set your frequency you want to affect around, and then you want to set your threshold, and you want to set your ratio. And you can see that the threshold appears there for you, and the ratio is actually sort of showing you a sort of bump of how much it's going to go bring it down by. You want to set your threshold so that it is low enough to catch whatever pokey frequency it is you're trying to get out. So you're set around that frequency because this frequency is poking out, and you're trying to compress it. So you set your threshold at where you don't want it really going above, where once it starts to get above here, this frequency is getting too loud, so I want to bring it down around here. And you set your ratio by however much you need to bring that frequency down. Then you set your attack and your release like you would on a compressor normally. I'll quite often find I'm using quite a fast attack if I'm using a dynamic EQ, because most of the times if I'm using a dynamic EQ, it's to get rid of something that's poking through. That's one of the main reasons I've been using it. I'm sure there are other ways you can use dynamic EQs, and I will explore them further, but that's one of the main ways I have found to use a dynamic EQ quite a bit. Now let's have a quick look at a multipressor to see how that is similar but different. A multipressor, it has the same sort of principle in that you're setting your frequencies, and then you're setting essentially a compressor, a threshold and a ratio, an attack and a release for a compressor. So they're all here. So we've got our compression threshold here, which is also represented on, we can move it on here as well. We've got our ratio there just under that, and then we've got our attack and our release. The difference between them is in the frequencies. So on the dynamic EQ, we are setting it like an EQ. We are picking a frequency around which we are adjusting the gain in some way, and we're setting a Q value for how steep the curve of that EQ is, but it's set around one particular frequency. Whereas on a multipressor, you set a band to compress. A band of multiple frequencies between one frequency and another to compress. It is compressing everything within this band range by the same amount. They're both very, very handy tools in kind of similar and different ways. So I just now want to show you guys a couple of the places in these mixes that I've been doing where I've used them as like an example of why I say they've really revolutionized my mixing and improved it drastically. Okay, so we've got one of my tracks up here, and I'm just going to solo this lead vocal and show you that on the lead vocal, gone one step further with this, and I've actually automated this dynamic EQ to only come on in a certain point. I've also got a multipressor on it. I didn't realize I had a multipressor on it. I have it come in once I start belting, so it's not on here because I'm not belting, and then I've got it on here because I am belting. And it's helping to bring down those really harsh frequencies in my belt. So let's just... So without that on, you can hear those really horrible, whistly, harsh frequencies in my belt come through massively. But they're not a problem when I'm not belting. So like back here, those frequencies are still in there. I don't want them dragged out, because what they're actually adding there is air and a nice feel, but when I'm belting, they're harsh and they're really... So I've got this dynamic EQ on, and it's bringing them down by quite a bit to help with that harshness. The multipressor is doing basically the same thing. It's also acting on those really harsh frequencies. I'm just going to turn that back on. That's a situation where I didn't just want to EQ all those harsh frequencies out, because there are other places where in the vocal where I wanted those frequencies to sit as they were naturally. I've done some weird stuff on this, I'm not gonna lie, but some of it worked pretty well in the end, so it's how it sounds that matters really, isn't it? So in this track, I've used a multipressor on the violin, but let's have a look at why I've used it. Let's solo this violin and give a listen to it. Yeah, so I've used it to reduce the sort of squeaky values that you can get in a violin around here. Because again, it wasn't a one specific frequency that's really ringing out, so a dynamic EQ didn't feel right. And an EQ in general didn't feel right because, like, there's a lot of the character of the violin lives here. I didn't want to lose that, but by just popping a multipressor on so that when those squeaks get a little bit too squeaky, it brings it out. Because it's not even the squeaks, it's, I think it's the sort of airiness too. Yeah, that airy whistliness. And it's something that you're probably not noticing as much just with the violin on its own here, so I'm going to give you a tiny, tiny section of it in the track. I don't want to ruin the track because it's not out yet, so I'll give you the section with no vocal in it. There we go. You can hear that violin is a little too whistly and squeaky without it. In not a way that's like a massive problem, it just made it sit a bit nicer in the track. Okay, so I found another fun one in this one. First of all, I'll just look at the fact that, again, on my lead vocal, I have a dynamic EQ on it, and this time it's really going for these two frequencies, are the ones that quite often I throw a dynamic EQ on to take care of in my lead vocal, because this is something that pokes out in my belt massively most of the time, but doesn't poke out anywhere else. So I quite often throw a dynamic EQ on to pull those out in my vocal. Again, that's the main way I've found I've been using a dynamic EQ. And it's really just changed how I approach my vocals. But there's an interesting one here in how I have treated the guitars, because I've got a multipressor on my guitars here. So I'm just going to solo the guitar so I don't spoil the rest of the track. This may have been partially the mic setup I was using, it may have been partially the guitar I was using, or it may just be the way that I was trying to get this guitar to sit in the track. But God, was it sounding bassy. I'm going to turn this off and show you. Okay, it doesn't sound, it's portraying me now, and it's not like showing off how bassy it was, because I've taken a load of bass off in this, so I have. Let's take the EQ off so you can really hear. So much bassy. But even this, when I was then putting it in the track with like the bass and the drums and stuff, you can hear already how that's getting really quite bassy. There's a lot of bass sort of coming through in all this. Until I take some of that bass out in the guitar. Because this guitar was just coming through a bit, this plucked guitar was just coming through a bit too bassy in this track. But I didn't want to like completely get rid of all of those bassy frequencies all together and never have them come through, because it was mostly on the initial plucks of those bottom strings, because I'm doing a thumb pluck kind of thing on the guitar. So that initial low string getting plucked is where a lot of that bass is coming from. It's that's really getting dragged down each time here. And it just allowed to make room for everything else going on in the track without completely decimating the bass on this acoustic, because I'd already EQ'd it loads and gotten rid of loads of bassiness, and it was still a bit too much. So I didn't want to go in with another EQ and rip this out of the whole song even more. So I opted to go with the multipressor option instead. Okay, here's just one last interesting way that I have used a dynamic EQ on another one of the tracks. On this track, I am slapping the acoustic guitar, and I played around with the idea of just not slapping it in the actual recorded guitar, because that would just be like maybe how I play it live, but like the drums would maybe be doing that part, but it sounded just wrong without the slap in there. But obviously when you slap an acoustic guitar like that, it adds a load to this high frequency range that is just and you don't want to like just EQ that out, because then you're like EQing out all of the nice sparkly range of the acoustic guitar. But those slaps are obviously quite a bit louder than everything else. So for one thing, it's been compressed, obviously. I think that goes on after the dynamic EQ. I think, yeah, I compressed after my dynamic EQ. But the other thing I decided to do was use a dynamic EQ on all of this high shelf here, and another little bit where the really big meaty bit of the slap hits, and use that to bring just the slap down. I've got the thresholds set so that they're only affecting when the slap happens, and without it on, you can hear those slaps are way too much. But with it on, those slaps have a more more body to them, less tinniness to them, and they're less of a high impact. So they can sit more nicely in the track, just adding a complement to the drums without like massively getting in the way. So yeah, those are a few different ways that I have used dynamic EQs and multipressors as I've been mixing these tracks that I've been working on recently. These tracks themselves still are a bit ropey in places. I am still very much learning as a mix engineer. This is just something I wanted to share as like something that has really changed how I approached these mixes, and I think has benefited them overall. I think that a lot of the tone of these mixes has been a lot better because I'm not just relying on EQ. I'm thinking more about, okay, do I want to take these frequencies out? And if so, do I want to take them out throughout the entire track? Or is like they're just a specific moment where this frequency is a problem and other places it's not? And is this something that wants a high shelf, maybe dipping these frequencies down? Or is it something where I want to put a multipressor on so that these frequencies are only coming down when they're really loud? It's giving me a bit more of a critical thought process behind why I would put EQ on in a certain spot, and if I really want to. More people need to be waxing lyrical about dynamic EQs and multipressors. Multipressors in particular. Multipressors are a really handy tool. That's all I really wanted to say on the subject matter. I would love to hear other people's opinions on dynamic EQs and multipressors, and also like if I've missed anything in this video, like important things you think people should know, or like a piece of advice of where you've used them that you think are really useful pieces of advice you picked up over the years. Feel free to share things like that in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then you might enjoy my content in general on this channel, in which case you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button, but I know that that is a big decision to make. You would not want to subscribe and unsubscribe. It'll make me cry. So you might want to check out some of the other content on here before you make your decision. There will be something recommended on the end screen for you. If you want to see my other various posts and shenanigans as a musician, then my socials are linked in the description below, and there are also links down there to my new artist socials, which is where I'll be posting about these songs that I've been working on when I'm ready to release them, and doing all like the fancy artsy video stuff. If you wanted to support me in more of a money kind of way, then I do have a buy me a coffee, which if you join my membership you get access to some little bits of exclusive content like outtakes videos from these videos, or you can just send me one-off little tips if you just wanted to say cool video mate. Okay, that is everything. I shall see you guys next time with another fun music related video of some sorts. Hopefully a music challenge or a songwriting challenge of some sort next time. I really want to do some sort of songwriting challenge next time. Don't hold me to that, guys. I might get stupidly busy again. Okay, bye!